Moving on, key concepts for lighting design. We're going to start by covering two kinds of stage lighting, general and specific. Then we will move on to the functions of specific stage lighting, then the responsibilities of the lighting designer. We'll talk about sound for a bit with the categories of sound, and finish up with the responsibilities of the sound designer. So we divide lighting into two kinds of stage lighting. General. General means lighting the stage to make sure that all the playing areas, the stage areas that are being used are adequately illuminated, lit. Nothing really special. Sometimes we call this a general wash. Sometimes we might use warm colors, cool colors to give it a general feel and mood. But this is, like it says, there's really nothing specific. It is very general lighting. So what does that mean? Well, it means that specific lighting actually serves a specific function. It's more than just illuminating the stage. It's more than just making sure everything is seen. We'll go into more detail on that the next slide. The first function of stage lighting is what is called selective visibility, and it really is that. We are selecting what's going to be visible to the audience. We only light the parts of the stage you want your audience to see. This is great for scenic designers. I mentioned it earlier. If you only light what you want your audience to see, that means you can have stuff on stage that's in the dark, and yet the audience knows that's still a part of the play. It's not part of the action at that time. So it aids in audience focus. It also allows that scenic designer then to create a set that does have multiple locations on stage at one time. Revelation of form is when a lighting designer is using the location and where the light is focusing on actors, on set pieces, to make it look more three-dimensional, to add depth to the stage areas. That's called revelation of form. You'll see the image that I have here is selective visibility, and because that light is coming directly from above, it does not aid in the three-dimensional illusion of the stage. If it were from the sides, it would do more of that. Revelation of form is used a lot in lighting for musicals, for dancers. I think the next function of specific stage lighting is probably the function that is easiest for us to identify with because of how we use light in our homes. You are setting a psychological mood, and this has to do with intensity of light. It can be the color of the light, the direction of the light. You'll see I have two examples here of light, fun, comedic atmospheres or mood. If you look back at some of my other images of shows, for example, in set design, you will see moody, dark. We respond to light intensity and color in a very natural, quick way. So it is a shorthand to use with the audience as far as setting that psychological mood. You can also use light to give the illusion of natures. Things like sunsets, lightning, light through a window so it can show the time of day. I've done shows where a car is supposed to be driving up in front of the house and you can see the headlights shine as it moves up to the front of the house through a window. Again, this is a great image of fire on stage, even though you don't actually want to have fire on stage because it can burn the theater down. You can give the illusion of nature using lights. The lighting designer has a lot to do. They have a lot of responsibilities. When you look at these responsibilities, what a lighting designer does, I think it gives you more of an appreciation for lighting on stage. Of course, your first responsibility is to eliminate the stage and actors, make sure you can see what you need to see. You know, I call this, again, the givens, the things that you gotta have. It's part of the script, it's referred to. You know, sometimes lighting designers can get so into establishing the mood, feeling, atmosphere, that they create lighting that maybe is too dark or too saturated in color, and actually makes it hard to see the actors. So that's what I mean. You need to make sure as a lighting designer that you have the stage and the actors lit so that they can be seen. You do want to establish that mood, feeling, atmosphere, and again, intensity of light, how bright, how dark it is, and the color are especially important in creating that mood and feeling. You have to have, as a lighting designer, a very thorough knowledge of what's on stage, meaning the set, the costume designs. You need to understand how your color in your lighting will affect things like the paint on the walls, the fabric that the actors' costumes are made of. You need to familiarize yourself very quickly. You know, it's one of the reasons I go into detail about responsibilities of each designer, because these decisions are made very early. They start before the show is even cast. And you must work with other designers and within that director's concept. I keep talking about theater being a collaborative art form, and again, this is part of that collaborative process. You also have to have thorough knowledge of stage movement, those playing areas. Where are actors the most? If you are at a theater that has limited resources, maybe you don't want to use a lot of lighting instruments for an area of the stage to illuminate an area of the stage where there's very little time focused on the actors. You want to make sure that the playing areas are given precedence. You want to sit in on rehearsals to watch that stage movement, and this is also where the stage manager, again, is a conduit for communication, because they will have a prompt book that has all the blocking, and they should be communicating with the lighting designer throughout the whole rehearsal process. Which areas of the stage are being used the most. If there are things like an entryway and you have an actor who's standing in that entryway and needs to be lit, the stage manager, it's their responsibility to make sure that that lighting designer is aware of that. Responsibilities of the lighting designer continued. You must complete a light plot. What a light plot, and by the way, the next slide has an example of a light plot and different lighting instruments. This light plot is basically your design. It is what you are using to communicate to the director and other designers where you are planning on placing light, what colors, how you're going to focus that light on the stage. It's a diagram with notations. Old school, it used to have lights that were created with little lighting templates, but of course nowadays we can create light plots using computer programming. And what it does is it gives you the battens that are part of the fly rail system, those poles where you're basically hanging the lights, and it's showing you which lighting instrument is going where. The different lighting instruments function in different ways. Some give broad light, some very narrow, some lighting is diffused and soft, some is harder or with harder edges. Nowadays there are lighting instruments, now they're still very expensive, but eventually the price will come down, that are robotic, that will move and will change gel colors, so you don't have to have as many lights hanging. So this is basically your plan. It is the light plot for a lighting designer, what rendering, sketches, etc. is for the set designer. Now once you have this, and the lights are hung, it is with the stage manager and director that you assign light cues. Cues are when those lights are going on and off. Nowadays we have a computerized board, so you can even program in how quickly the light comes up or goes down. And it is your job as a lighting designer to create a cue sheet and to train the light board operator and make sure that everything is prepared and ready for the play. Moving on to sound design. In sound, we start by categorizing what kind of sound we're using. There's 3 categories of sound. Music, and I'm not talking here about musical theater songs, that kind of music. I'm talking about music that functions in the following ways. First, to establish the mood, time period, location. You know, there's just certain songs that are iconic, that we use to indicate a specific time period. You know, 80s music for a show that takes place in the 80s. Sometimes if you have a very romantic scene, we play soft, pretty romantic music underneath that. You know, film latched onto this, and they do this constantly. You know, think about the last time you watched an action film that didn't have big booming, you know, action soundtrack. Also, to fit the demands of the script, there are plays during which the actors talk about a piece of music. They might put on an album or a CD and dance and sing. So you want to make sure that that song, that music is there. Again, I've already talked somewhat about underscoring because of establishing the mood, time period. You know, underscoring is that music, this is the term for it, played under scenes to manipulate the mood and emotions of the audience. Also, character themes. Now, this is more for melodramas and those kinds of plays, but sometimes you'll have characters, and every time they enter the stage, there is a specific piece of music that plays. If you look at old school, well, I say old school, but cartoons, even today, there are certain songs that are identified with, say, the villain or the hero, and this music plays every time they enter the stage or enter the scene. We do that in theater as well. And you know, when it comes to establishing mood, we do that before the show starts, after the show is over, during scene changes. Again, we want to keep the audience's emotions basically where we want them. You know, if we've just done a very stressful, action-driven scene, and the next scene is soft and romantic between 2 characters, often during that scene change, we will change the music so that we can lead the audience into that scene, already getting clues about the emotions and the mood and what's getting ready to happen. It's also very handy because music covers up footsteps and the sounds of scene changes. Our other 2 categories of sound are sound effects. Things like thunder, doorbell, phone rings, etc. Usually today they're recorded because there's easy access to all of these different sound effects. Sometimes, however, we have sound that is happening on stage or created. You know, there are old school doorbell buzzers that the actor can use backstage, and so the audience can hear that noise that ring is coming from that old school turning of that doorbell. We call that a practical. In fact, in lighting, anytime an actor walks over and actually turns on a lamp that's not part of the soundboard, but that is plugged in and a cord is run backstage, we call that a practical. The last category of sound is amplification, using microphones. Now sometimes those microphones will be above the stage, catching the general sound of the stage. Sometimes those microphones are for the individual actors. This is a technology that has changed substantially in just the last 20 years. Certainly body mics, those mics, and you've probably seen performers using, the body mics that come down from their hairline. Those are certainly getting much better. In the early days of amplification and microphones, there was a lot of problems with feedback, those microphones catching sounds of other actors. But nowadays, they've gotten pretty darn good. We don't use them a lot in educational theater because I'm trying to train my actors to have volume, projection, and also because they're really expensive. And we don't have them, and certainly you don't want to have like one actor on stage and their voice is coming through the speakers and then nobody else's is. You want to be very uniform in how you use your amplification. So the responsibilities of the sound designer. Provide the sound. Whether it's recorded or practical, you do have to be the person. You don't just make a list. You have to go and record that sound, make sure it's in a format that the system of the theater where you are working, whether it is MP3, whether they only have a CD player, whatever, you need to make sure that your sound is recorded properly and is there for the play. You do want to fill the demands of the script, the givens. Is there required sound? Is there a phone that rings throughout the show and actors go, oh, I have to answer the phone. And you want to make sure you have that phone ring there. It is your responsibility to provide and maintain equipment. This generally means microphones. Sometimes you might need to rent something. And you don't have to actually purchase and provide the equipment. You just want to make sure your theater is prepared to fulfill the demands of your sound design. We have a lot of professional shows that come through Angelina College, and almost all of them, when it comes to musicals especially, bring their own soundboards and their own sound equipment with them because they want to make sure that they have what they need. They don't want to rely on antiquated or old school. They don't want to take the chance of that kind of soundboard. Okay, along with the stage manager and the director, as with the lighting designer, you provide a cue sheet, a list of all of the cues, when the sound happens, how the stage manager is supposed to call that sound. You train your soundboard operator and any backstage personnel that you are using. All of those are part of the sound designer's responsibility.